Well, hello everyone. S.T.A.L.K.E.R here, and I don't bring any good news. You see, originally in the last video, which is the part 1 of the episode 3 of the BUILDO series, I promised that I would show you the Rostock factory afterwards. But sadly, I cannot show you the Rostock factory, at least not in video format, so there will be no exploration of the level. Unfortunately, for some reason, Rostock just refuses to work for me. I can only get about 1 minute into the build before it just crashes every single time. So unfortunately, I can't really just record a playthrough. I was defeated by this level, okay? I kneel in front of BUILDO Rostock because my computer just refuses to run this level. 1 minute and it crashes every single time. So unfortunately, I won't be able to keep up my promise of showing you the Rostock map, in gameplay. I can only show you pictures. Thankfully, the other maps actually worked, so I will be able to show you at least those in motion. BUILDO Rostock, the map that defeated me and made my computer kneel. Now, this Rostock is extremely different from the one you know. It is much, much larger, like way larger than you think. In fact, I think that just the Rostock factory area is already bigger than like the bar. It is immense. And the thing is, this is just the Rostock factory. Originally, this factory was just a sub area for the whole, bar area. So the bar area was even bigger, and the Rostock factory was just a sub area of it. It is immense. Like the original maps were perhaps a little bit too ambitious and a bit too big looking back on it. But the most interesting part about this map is that it's actually based on a real place. Like Rostock Factory exists. Of course, not the one in the game, but this original BUILDO Rostock absolutely exists. In fact, it was where GSC was based during their earlier years. It is a real factory located outside of Kiev, and the fact that this is where their studio was based probably explains why they were able to model it so well. Like, it is one of the, in my opinion, best looking Buildo maps. Like, the Rostock factory just holds a special place in my heart when it comes to Buildo. It just looks so, like, good and interesting. Like, this whole factory complex that it just really makes me sad that it was cut, to be quite honest. Thankfully, though, it did kind of live on later because it did return as a multiplayer map in Clear Sky. So at least we can have that. Anyways, on to the next map that I can actually show footage of because this one actually runs the generators. In fact, the very first appearance of the generators. I'll see you there. Alright, so now we got the generators here. The first appearance of the generators. And of course, it's a very basic version of the map. It is basically just a wide open area with these meteor style kind of craters surrounded by the, of course, generators. Although in this one they aren't turned on yet, they're actually just there. Like they don't do anything. They don't have the animations or anything else they have in the later versions, at least not yet. They also seem to be connected to like some kind of central antenna sort of thing. That's the only way I can describe it. It's the little metal thing in the middle. And behind every single one of these generators is these huge openings in the earth that kind of look like meteor impacts. But the generators are not the only thing in this map. We actually have a village and the Monolith Military Laboratory, where the sea consciousness originally resides. One more interesting thing here is this road, which seems to lead out of the zone. I have a theory that this road is the Belarusian entrance of the zone, or at the very least, the entrance to the Belarusian zone, because we know that the generators are very far up north. In fact, they're described as more north than the CNPP. So I like to think that this road leads to the Belarusian zone. And this is the checkpoint that kind of blocks it, separates the Ukrainian zone from the Belarusian zone. What's weird is also the trees around this map. They seem to be incredibly twisted and deformed, if you haven't already noticed. It seems like whatever the generators are doing has also affected the plant life of the area, as these extremely deformed trees are pretty much completely unique to the generators. Now, in the original Oblivion Lost idea, the generators were the final area that the player would go to. The CNPP was actually the second to last level. You would complete the CNPP and then you would discover the secret area of the generators, and in there is where you would fight the sea consciousness. So now we're approaching here the village, which is flanked by a river and also some strange trash. That's the best I can describe it. It seems to be like parts of a building, concrete. The village in this version is incredibly simple. It is literally just one house, one well, and that's it. And both houses are completely destroyed. It's a very basic version of the more complex village that will come to this map later. But continuing about the plot, basically, the generators are where the sea consciousness resides, and in here you would have to battle your way into the monolith bunker, which I will show you in just a second. And in that bunker is where you would actually kill the sea consciousness. Now, they also had some wild ideas, like, the moment you kill the sea consciousness, they try to launch a nuke at the center of the zone, and it causes a massive emission that basically kills everyone in the zone, and the zone expands. It's kind of weird. Like, the documents can't really seem to make up their mind on what the ending was supposed to be. Like, some ending says that the stalker would have been captured, or the journalist would have been mutilated beyond recognition. It gets weird. It was probably the same thing they did with the final game, where they had multiple endings. At least that's what I believe. So this right here is the monolith base. And this is basically would be the last area that the player would have to fight the monolith. Because the moment they go into the laboratory, they will probably face off against, things like poltergeists and whatnot. So this would basically be the last stand of the monolith before the player could reach the sea consciousness. And it's good to think about that. To think that the sea consciousness, like this almost all-powerful entity, is stored in this simple bunker with a small little military base and nothing else. I think it's interesting, and that's why I really hate that they removed the generators, because the generators are such an interesting area. They're almost like the culmination of everything. Like, you go through all of S.T.A.L.K.E.R, and in the end, the supposed, the thing that was supposed to be the monolith, the thing that was supposed to be, almost like these gods, they're just residing in this tiny area with the generators inside a bunker, protected by a couple of their troops. Hell, they're protected by secrecy more than the troops. So I kind of dislike that they cut the generators. Although, you could argue that the generators are actually still canon, because in the end of Shadow of Chernobyl, we jump into a teleporter and then suddenly we are in the same room as the sea consciousness. So I think it's kind of safe to assume that that last teleporter sent the marked one to the sea consciousness. So basically, like, that teleporter sent him to the Monolith War Lab beneath the generators. Because we do know that the generators exist. Like, in the CNPP, we can find 4 generators fully active, releasing some kind of energy impulse into the sky. So we do know that they are part of the S.T.A.L.K.E.R canon. So who's to say that the generators can't? So personally, my head canon is that that teleporter sent the marked one to the generators, and that the generators will come back in S.T.A.L.K.E.R 2. Because, to be honest, why wouldn't they come back? Like, this map is just too cool to not come back, you know what I mean? So my personal headcanon is that the generators are canon, and that is where the sea consciousness is. And now we are done with this build, and on to the next one, 1511. Build 1511. This build was created for an exhibition at the 2003 Games Convention. It was basically created to film demos for a trailer to be shown at the exhibition. It contains 10 locations, although pretty much all of them are test locations, except for 3 of them. The first army warehouses, the first radar map, and of course, the sarcophagus. The HUD was also changed. If you remember in the previous build, it had that weird ass, text inventory. In this one, it's no longer text. It's an actual fully fledged inventory graphical interface. Physics have also been slightly improved, including the vehicle physics. Alright, so now here we are in the army warehouses, and I'm just gonna say this out of the gate. Disclaimer, this is the most boring Buildo map ever. The army warehouses are the most boring Buildo map because look at it. It is practically the same thing as the one on release. Like, out of all the maps, every single map, this one is the one that changed the least. I don't know who made this map, but the guy struck gold during the first attempt because this map basically did not change. The army warehouses only suffered small aesthetic, modifications throughout the years, but the basic layout was always the same. And I think it was only slightly bigger. So that's it. Like, it is the map that changed the least. It pretty much stayed the same way from the build all the way to release. Of course, this is a very early version, so obviously there's no swamp, there's no, loner camp, there's no farm, there's not even the barrier. And the Bloodsucker village does not exist at this point in time. So it's basically just the military base, and everything else is just flat green land. That road to the right leads to the Brain Scorcher. Basically, it's the proto-barrier. The road to the left, on the other hand, actually leads to the Dead City. At least originally it did. Before the Dead City got, went the way of the dodo. But as you can see, it is an incredibly basic map. It is literally just a military base, a couple of roads, and the rest of the map is still not done. Everything else is just missing. And like I said, it changed very little. Like, I think the biggest change was the locations, and some of the terrain got raised, and some of the terrain also got lowered. That's it. Like, they had this thing done in the first try. Like, they made the map and they already liked it, and they were like, yeah, this is it. We don't need to change. Just add some stuff on top. And of course, I don't even need to mention this. If you saw the iceberg or you follow the development story of S.T.A.L.K.E.R, you already know this. Originally, the military base in the army warehouses was not the base of freedom. Instead, it was the base of the Sin faction. So this map right here was originally created with the idea of this being the base of the Sin code. So it's pretty cool to see. It's kind of like a pre-freedom army warehouses. And here we have the Brain Scorcher antenna array. This is the first version of the radar ever created. And you can see that it's very similar to the one we got. Like, all it's really missing is just a couple of, additional small areas and some decoration. But the basic geometry is pretty much identical to the one we got on release. Although, of course, this is a much earlier version, so it doesn't really have the aesthetic or the lighting or the environment of the final one. So it just looks like a pleasant, sunny place, you know what I mean? It doesn't look like the dreadful Brain Scorcher that it does on release. One of the interesting things here is that this might be the first build that includes the blind dogs, as you can see them here, as idols, quote unquote, i.e. they don't have AI, they just stand there. We can also find the entrance to the bunker in the final games blocked off, which shows that this was not the way that they originally intended for the player to access the Brain Scorcher. You see, the player was actually supposed to enter the Brain Scorcher near the entrance of the radar area. When you play the game, remember that little side road that takes to a bunker? That is where the original entrance was. They had to move the entrance to that area later. Now, if I zoom out here, I'm going to show you also something very interesting. There is a cut road that leads to the radar area. It just comes from the left side of the radar. I don't know what area it could possibly be connecting to, because I don't think there's any place that's like left of the brain scorcher area, so I don't know what the purpose of this road was. All I know is that in the final game, it got completely removed and the hill just, buried it. And if we move over here to the front, we can see two things. Just how early this map is, because it abruptly ends into a void of nothingness after you go down the road. But that it also has a second cut road, another one, making it 3 roads that lead to the antenna array. And I don't know where these roads could have possibly led to. Maybe this would have been the entrance to the Pripyat city? Or maybe the other road is the one that led to Pripyat. I don't know. It also may be that originally they had the idea of you being able to reach the brain scorcher using different approaches. So maybe you could flank the brain scorcher from either the left or the right, or you could just charge from the front. I don't know, and it's impossible to tell. But that's how they designed it, and later on, these 2 roads disappeared. Still, it is very similar to the one we got on release. Again, just some basic things got cut, but it's still very interesting. And I'll just give you a nice final view of this BUILDO brain scorcher array, and after that, we will go to the last level of this build, the original sarcophagus. Alright, so here we are in the sarcophagus, a very, very early sarcophagus. And before I show the map, I'm going to show you the inventory really quick, which is somewhat similar to the one we know. As you can see, it's an actual graphical interface instead of just being text. So that's already a huge advancement. And just to say this off the bat, this sarcophagus isn't really that interesting. Like, it doesn't really have that much. It's mostly just the corridors inside of the CNPP. And this map seemingly was just made so GSC could test placing NPCs around. They don't have AI, they just stand there. But their models are very interesting. For example, we can find this NPC right here, which is wearing the cut Cat9M armor, which is very cool. Like, this is basically the first time that this armor ever shows up. There's also, many other NPCs in this build that I also want to show, especially the last one. There's a very good, very special last one. In here we have a Freedomer, but you already saw that one. Also an RPG on the floor, probably to test a new physics system, because now explosions can actually launch objects. And if we move here, we can go to the entrance, which does not exist yet, so it's just a dead end. If we go on back, we can go to that, large room that the monolith defends in the final game. Although in here, you can just access through here. And this guy is special. This is the first exoskeleton ever made. And this is what the exoskeleton was originally supposed to be like. You can already see that the model for the exo itself got preserved until the final game, but the suit changed. Originally, the exoskeleton was basically a super sunrise suit. It was pretty much the best armor in the game, the protection was amazing, but it looked like a heavily upgraded sunrise suit. Only later did they create the whole red suit thing. Originally, it was just supposed to be, this super sunrise suit. So it's very interesting. It's cool to see where the concept started before they made the red suit. I still hold this version of the exoskeleton, close to my heart. I like it. I wish it would come back in some sort of game. Obviously, they should nerf it, just make it a sunrise suit that allows you to carry more shit. And in here, we can find a do tier. However, this is a very early do tier, so early, in fact, that they don't even have a faction patch. They just have this red radiation symbol. So this is very early. We go on here, we can find the staircase that leads to the upper corridors that lead to the reactor 4. Here we find a loner, which looks a lot like Ghost now that I think about it. Like I said, this is basically just a early version of the sarcophagus, so the geometry is very similar to the one we got. And here we get a bunch of corridors filled with more of the idols, quote unquote, which are just models with no AI. But in this room, we find a very interesting thing. The first bloodsucker model. I'm not looking at it right now, I'm looking at dogs, but just give me a moment. I'll walk to it in a second now. And there it is. That's the boy. The first bloodsucker, baby. And as you can see, he really did not change much. And moving back here, we just eventually loop back around to the beginning. And no, before you ask, you cannot go to the reactor 4. It's not finished yet. It just ends abruptly right there. So you cannot go to the reactor 4. Now there's one more location I want to show you before I'm done with this map. And just like in the final game, we can find the entrance to the secret laboratory right over here. Although it's a little bit different from the one you know. For starters, the hallway is a lot smaller and tighter, especially with all these pipes. It is a much tighter hallway. I don't I can't imagine how the fight, when you use the decoder, because there's so little room to move. Not only that, but the area is not finished yet. So there's no door. It just ends on a corner and that's it. It also has a little side room that got cut. So maybe the side room was where you were supposed to take cover, you know what I mean? Because I just can't imagine how a fight against 12 monolith experts would have went down in a hallway like this. So that was another episode of Buildo, and I really hope you enjoyed it. And this episode was a little bit different from the other ones, and I have a reason for that. See, every episode I always try to cover 6 builds. 6 builds every episode. That's what I always try to do. The problem is that some of these builds are starting to get big, especially the later ones. Like for example, there are some builds that I'll just have to dedicate an entire video to, like for example our 1935. So I decided to cut this episode into 2 parts, part 1 and part 2. So here's my proposition. I want to see what you guys want to see. Do you want me to continue cutting episodes into parts, or do I do it the old way where it doesn't matter how big it is, I just make it as long as possible? So if the video is 1 hour long, so be it. I really want to know what your guys' opinions on this are. Do you want me to keep, the long form episodes where like every episode is 1 hour long, or do you want me to do the new style where I cut it into multiple parts if it gets too big? Please leave your feedback in the comments.